whiteboard? Can I get a whiteboard? Can I get a whiteboard? Can I get a whiteboard?
Hello there. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Nicole Johnson, who is here. We are doing episode 2 of Can I Get a Whiteboard? Nikki is joining me. She is a longtime educator, administrator, and now special education facilitator. And Nikki, I'm going to start you off with a question. I have a great fondness for whiteboards and I feel they are peak teacher technology. And I wanted to ask you, what is a piece of teacher tool or teacher material that you feel like is the one that is the most effective?
By the way, I love this. My favorite story that's come out lately is the Silicon Valley, where they got rid of all technology and really just kind of got back to that in-person, hands-on learning. And I'm a huge, huge proponent of that. So when you told me your favorite piece of technology, I laughed because I cannot tell you how many times over the last week I've been like, "Can I have a dry erase board?" Or "Can I have a dry erase marker and a whiteboard?" And half the time they can't find a whiteboard. So then I'm like, just move out of the way because we can write on the desktops with this dry erase marker. So yes, but what I will say, if I had to pick one, it would be a manipulative. And when I say that, I mean anything. So I taught a very sporadic math lesson last week, and I said, Guys, I just need 10 of anything, right? Just give me 5 of one color and 5 of another. Doesn't matter what it is, we can make this lesson work with just some hands-on visuals." And so if I had to only pick one, I would say a manipulative, because I feel like I'm leaving that wide open to use anything. So for my impromptu lesson, I used 5 red toy bears and 5 blue toy bears.
That completely makes sense. Yeah, if you whip it out. I remember the other day I was playing a board game and I was like, "We just need some Lego pieces, anything, some rubber bands, anything." So yes, perfect, wonderful answer. So Nikki, I have you here, and obviously I'm delighted to have you. So can you tell us a little bit about your background professionally, where you started and where you are now?
Sure. So I was not an education major. I was political science major, dreams of going to law school. Did the whole adult career switcher program, I guess you would say. So I was a medical office manager. I had off on Thursdays, and I was like, oh, I could substitute teach on Thursdays. And might I tell you, from the backdrop to this, in high school, my guidance counselor said, "I think you'd be a lovely teacher." I said, "I wouldn't be a teacher if it was the last job on the whole planet." So that's where we left off. And then my interview for to be a teacher for the very first time, my superintendent was my high school guidance counselor. And we went through the
Oh,
whole interview, and she said, "Just in case you don't remember, I told you so." And it just it evolved into a principal that I was teaching at offering me a full-time position. So I resigned from my other position, became a long-term sub, and then started my master's in special education. And I knew after the first year that if I was going to stay in education, I wanted to be in administration. I wanted to be at a level where I felt like I could make some change. So I taught for 5 years, which was the minimum requirement in West Virginia at that time, while I finished my master's in education. And then I finished my degree in educational administration. And literally, I finished the 5th school year. In July of that year, I got hired as an assistant principal. And I did that for 3.5 years. And then an opportunity came up for me to move into a Title I school as a head principal. And so I jumped at that, and I did that for 8.5 years. And then, just for some personal reasons, it was going to be a little more than I could give of myself. And so I took a part-time position working with a local school system, training teachers with students who have autism. And so now I'm considered, it's called a facilitator of specialized instructional programs. And basically, I have a region, and within that region, I train teachers who specialize in autism.
okay. I didn't quite know all that backstory. All right. So we're going to kind of talk today a little bit more focused on your administrative work, just because we're talking about, implementing change and where we can
Yes.
see that change and how we can implement it on a local level. To paint a picture for our audience, where did you feel you were most powerless as a principal? Where were the limits of your power? Because I think that is something that needs to be clarified for people, because I think people sometimes assume principals have more power than they do. So can you give kind of an idea of what those parameters were for you?
Yeah, it is definitely with the policies and the initiatives that your central office sets for you. So, the main spot that I always felt constraint was standardized testing. We have no say in that. We have to go with whatever the county and the state set as our policy on how often we test and what we test on and what age groups, what grade levels, subjects, all of those things. So, standardized testing became a huge thorn in our side, and it was something that really restricted our time and our ability to do some of the things the way we wanted to because we were held to the standard of those tests.
And when it comes to standardized testing, why did you not feel that that was something that was helpful within your building or within your community?
So it wasn't that it wasn't helpful. I do see the beauty and the benefit of standardized testing and assessments in general. What it was the volume of them and the age group. We're starting some of these district wide tests at in kindergarten. And so while the state testing starts at third grade, which I also think is a little young. The district assessments on top of those standardized testing were a lot. And then it wasn't just one, it was multiple different assessments that we had to give. We had to benchmark those at the beginning, middle, and end of the year. And it got to the point where my number one complaint from teachers was that they spent more time assessing their students than teaching their students.
So you're talking about standardized testing, not just the big standardized test that happens
Right.
once a year by you're talking about the multiple progress monitoring, all the little bench
Yes.
that we have to do throughout the
Yes.
year along
Yeah,
the
all
way.
of those district assessments in addition to the statewide standardized testing. And like I said, I agree with we want to be able to test and to benchmark and to make sure that our kids are progressing on the trajectory that we want. It was just the volume of that and the rigidity in it. We weren't able to choose what tests we were going to use. So if we were working on a specific initiative and we had some assessment that we thought would really benefit our students, our hands were limited, so we could add some assessments, but we couldn't switch or change for the assessment that we thought was appropriate for our students or our building. We were tied to whatever the district had chosen for us.
Now, as a teacher, what I have found with the standardized testing is that if I was working with a student, I typically knew that student, backwards and forwards. I knew exactly what sounds they knew, what sounds they didn't. If we were working on phonics, I knew what math skills they could complete, what math skills they couldn't complete. And so I found it in a way it fed into or it seemed to be tied to a little bit of a mistrust of the
Yes.
educator themselves. And standardized tests are a way that we are replacing educators in a way that we don't need to. That if we just respected and trusted and understood, our teachers' knowledge base, that we wouldn't feel the need for these kinds of levels of standardized testing. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. And that is the number one thing that I heard from my teachers is I already know this or I could have told you that. And I think a lot of times what we do with nationwide teacher shortages and people coming in who maybe don't have that teaching pedagogy that they need is we put these things in place to make sure those people are progressing the way that they need to and that they're doing what they need to. And then you are seasoned teachers and you are lifelong educators and people who know what they're doing already know how to do that, and they don't need an assessment to prove that. But it's just like a check on your performance where we're showing you that we've taught our kids these things. And then it bothers me that we've put our kids into such a box now. I hate when standardized assessment scores come out and now or district assessments come out and now we're tied to certain interventions and certain things. And we're at kindergarten giving our kids this sense of, I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. What I bring to the table isn't what we need. And I love the picture with the fish and the elephant and the monkey, and it says, "Here's your standardized assessment. Everybody climb that tree." And what beauty that a fish can swim, but he can't climb a tree. So if we're only looking at his ability to climb a tree, then he's not a good enough fish. And I think we do that to our kids I don't think we do that intentionally, but subconsciously, that's what we're saying to our kids over and over. And to your point, subconsciously, that's what we're saying to our teachers. We don't respect you, we don't trust you, and we don't have any faith in what you're doing. So here's your check and balance, and here's how we're going to watch you and monitor you. And instead of taking those new teachers, taking those teachers whose pedagogy isn't as strong and building up their ability, having them have teacher mentors and do things to strengthen their teaching, we just keep monitoring it with the test. And then we become a group that teaches to a test.
Yeah. How do you think, in terms of your role now? I was speaking to an educator recently who is talking about having to put their children who are in an autism classroom on computers for a certain amount every day, and how frustrating that was when you're dealing with students who really aren't understanding it or are nonverbal. And I was wondering how you're seeing that play out with standardized testing happening in those autism classrooms. Do you have any thoughts on that?
What I'm seeing in my county is that we do have an alternative assessment. The alternative assessment is not computer based, but it can be, right? I can give it paper pencil, or the student can put their answers directly in. I can give the student the question and I can enter the answer as a teacher. So it has some flexibility there. However, if you opt for that route, then you've now changed your child's degree track, and they're on what we call an applied studies diploma, which means four-year colleges won't accept that degree, and some technological colleges and community colleges won't accept that. And again, we're asking parents at times to make this decision in third grade. Otherwise, their child is being forced to take these computerized assessments and do these computerized intervention programs and things, all gearing them towards passing this test that the way it's designed, they're not going to pass, or they most likely won't pass, I should say, because it is not designed to assess the way their brain works and the disabilities that they're facing. It doesn't mean that they are not capable of earning a high school diploma. It just means they're not capable of doing it in the way that we've set for them. So we see a lot of computerized programs that are really geared towards making sure that you're making progress towards the tested standards. And you're exactly right. It does not work for students with disabilities, but it's not a good thing for any of our students, right? We're seeing all these lawsuits across the county with technology addiction, and we see issues with visual impairments where we're staring at blue light and things for hours at a time. And now this is what school has become too. So it's disheartening that, again, that's our method, when I guarantee you there's a teacher in that classroom that knows exactly what those kids need and could give it to them herself. She just can't print out a data report every day to prove it.
Well put. Well put. And I also think of all those tech companies who are making so much money and are lobbying our education departments to continue pushing this product.
Yeah.
This is not an interest free or money free area.
Correct. Correct.
Now, you said you had gotten into administration partially because you wanted that power to make change. Give us an overview of where you were able to implement change as an administrator.
So it's really funny because I think in all of these professions, right, you have this preconceived notion of what it is and what you can do. And then you get into it and you're like, oh, nope, not exactly, right? So I thought teaching, well, that's super easy, right? They get off every day at 3:30. They have the summers off. What a cake job. Absolutely not. The bulk of what I did as an educator was outside of school hours on my own time. And so one of the things I found quickly as an administrator is it is limited, right? You have a bigger voice, you have a bigger stage, you have a more direct line to the people making those choices, but you yourself are still pretty limited. And I looked at some of my teachers, and, I won't say her name and embarrass her, but one of my best teachers was really one that always pushed back, right? She always gave me a really hard time about things and challenged me on things that I just needed her to do because we had to. But the more I started to get to know her and to look at that, I thought, you know what? She's right, right? She's the teacher who can tell me I don't need to do this assessment that the county is now adding in the middle of the year to prove that my kids can do this. Because if you give me a kid in my class, I can tell you exactly what they can do. And so I'm looking at all of these different things that we're being told that we have to do and that we need to do, and certain ways that we have to do things. And it's again to kind of put us all in that mold. And I had a strong leadership team, and I just came back and said, look, here's the deal, right? I'm at the point in my career where I feel pretty safe. I feel pretty comfortable in my ability to understand what we need and how this whole system works, right? We are going to do the things that are going to benefit our kids and our families and our staff, and that are going to grow us as an organization. And we'll ask for forgiveness, right? Instead of permission. But we put some things in place for our kids that we just knew they needed. We knew that looking at the whole child, this is what our kids did. And so I would say our most successful initiative, we had a rock star of a coach, right? And she worked with our teachers on teaching ELA and math. And she had come from a background of whole language and had a degree in reading, and really was stressing on how much it wasn't working for our kids. So she asked to go to some trainings and do some conferences and things that she thought could grow her. And she went out and she did all of this research, and she came back and just said, what we are doing for our kids is not working. And so she proposed a plan of how we were going to assess our kids and really drill down to each of their levels of need. We had 6 different levels of kids, and we broke our staff up into groups. We created a time during the day where everybody was going to stop. It wasn't going to interfere with that whole group learning, with our curriculum. And we were going to give our kids intervention in groups of exactly what they needed, and we were going to track their growth and their progress. And later, she ended up doing some training through letters and through Orton Gillingham, and all of the things that she took from that really tied into what she was doing. Building that Scarborough's rope, where we're talking about decoding as well as the comprehension and how those things play. We had an incredible interventionist. She did a great job pairing with our coach and training our staff and really building up our kids. And we saw huge amounts of growth. And it wasn't necessarily our growth on the standardized assessments, right? We used a core phonics screener. And it was our growth that we were seeing. Our kids were really making progress, and they were really figuring out what they needed to know, and growing and gaining some pride in some things in themselves. And eventually, we ended up getting our entire building trained in Orton Gillingham, and it became a county initiative for all K2 teachers. And it really started just because we decided that we weren't gonna follow completely in line with what everyone else was doing. We were really going to look at our kids from that whole group perspective. We were going to figure out what they needed, and we were going to figure out how to give it to them. And we spent a lot of hours, outside of work and in the evenings and on the weekends and on phones and watching podcasts. And it wasn't an easy thing to do, but it was so beneficial that I feel like almost everyone got behind it fully. And we made a ton of growth over those couple of years.
That really was a leading program for the county that has become implemented so far. So kudos to you guys. And that does take stepping out of the comfort zone and you thinking of what your building needs. What it really requires is people who have that kind of creative, collaborative thinking, who are willing to kind of dive all in for their school.
Like you said, it just has to be about something bigger than you. And the best advice I got when I became a head administrator was that as an assistant principal, you really take care of your people, and you have your niche, and this is what you're assigned to do. And, part of mine was working with my teachers directly and supporting them and making sure their needs were met. And the best advice I got was from our current superintendent at the time. And she said, what you have to realize is that as a head principal, the whole building is yours, right? But your only job is to make sure that when you lay your head on the pillow at night, you can answer the question, did I do what was in the best interest of my students? And if you did, sleep easy. And if you didn't, wake up, revise, and reflect. And it was the best piece of advice I ever got, because all I could think is, if you call me to the table and you say, we told you to do this and you did this, explain yourself. All I have to show you is that it benefited my children. And if you need to fire me for that, well, then that's okay. But it gave me the confidence I needed to do some of those things. And then again, just working with this incredible group of educators who could come and show me, like, this is what our kids need. What we're doing is failing them. And that's that key phrase, right? If what I'm doing is failing my child, then why am I here? Because my job is to grow these kids and to protect these kids and give them what they need to go out into the world and pursue their own dreams. So that made it easier.
It's amazing that you had that win and you had that opportunity. And I know there were plenty of times, that I knew you that you didn't always have wins or you weren't allowed to go out as far as you wanted in terms of academic autonomy or pursuing what you thought might be exactly what would fit the needs of your students. But if you had been able to acquire more academic autonomy for your building and make more academic choices for them, do you have any thoughts of how you might have taken that even further for your building, or ways that you might have said, I want to develop more, programs that are unique to our school that would really serve our needs of our students? Because I know your building was Title I, you had high levels of special education, high levels of trauma, high levels of poverty. So did you
Yes.
ever have any further thoughts of, if I only had this, I would do this? Was there any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so one of the things that we really pushed for, and our county did temporarily, I think it was about a semester that they agreed to. We really wanted to focus on the core, right? Focus on reading and math, and use science and social studies as ways to just build that rich, diverse background knowledge and that content knowledge, but really put our focus on those basic fundamentals for reading and those basic fundamentals for math. So we were hoping to teach everything integrated, right? Our big focus was on reading. How can we pull in science into our reading? How can we pull in social studies into our reading? And math, how can we utilize our scientific concepts that we need to, and some social studies, charting and graphing and all these things to just really enrich our math and ELA. One of our teachers' classrooms did a whole walkthrough arcade where they had to use the scientific concepts of push and pull and kinetic energy and things like this to build arcade games. And then other kids came in and played the arcade games, and she tied in kind of the social studies and civics concepts of fundraising, and they raised money and they picked an organization and they calculated how much they needed to meet their initiatives and their goals for the year. So they set a goal with their arcade for how much money they needed to raise to support, I believe it was the animal shelter. And so they did all of these cool concepts from government, from science, all of these things, and it was in the confines of their math and ELA. They were writing expository writings on how to build these machines, and they were calculating the sizes. And I mean, it was a really incredible unit, but it just showcased how you could really hit all of those fundamentals while making it this big, cool, whole learning model. And we had great success with it. Our teachers really liked it. It took some of the slack off of teachers on grading all of these additional subjects and topics where we were just focused on our grading and ELA and math. But ultimately, it was something that the county decided not to move forward with. And it's one of those things that you don't have a choice, right? So that is the one thing that I really think if we would have been able to see it through, it would have been a great thing. Um, and as a sidebar to that, one of our classrooms that had the most success with that was a multi-generational classroom, and they taught multiple grade levels. And so they would do some kind of basically assessment, right? They would do a formative assessment at the beginning and figure out what kids knew what, and we would group our kids accordingly and teach that way. So it wasn't necessarily fourth grade standards versus fifth grade standards. Each kid got to work kind of where they are, with some kids that were focusing on just basic review of the fourth and fifth grade standards, and we're working on some sixth grade standards because they'd already mastered the fourth and fifth grade. And that was another program that we absolutely loved and wish we could have expanded, but it stayed pretty isolated to that one teacher running her program that way. But her kids had some of the highest test scores in our building when we did assessments. She had some of the lowest rates of behavior. I mean, it was a pretty incredible program that I wish, as a piece of that just kind of whole learning integrated model, we could have looked at more of the multi-generational classrooms as well.
I think those are fantastic. I love non-traditional, classroom models. I think they're
Yes.
fantastic. I also think that when we do those integrated academics with English and social studies and math and science being able to integrate more, I think what people might not fully understand is that when we have to separate them out like that, that also puts time constraints and it requires a certain amount of academic time every day. So when we
Right.
try to build in time for certain schools, allow more time for recess, like you might have a recess of 30 minutes in the morning and another recess time in the afternoon, you can't find that time even if you want
Right.
to build it in. And so part of when we do want to do models that are more movement based or more exploratory
Right.
based, we don't have the time for that when we're given these mandatory chunks of time for ELA, for math, and all those kinds of things. So I think that that can really take a weight and time pressures off of both students and of teachers to be more creative with how they use their time and how they let students explore learning in a more creative fashion.
Yes. And some of the curriculums that we use don't necessarily align, right? So my social studies curriculum might be written by one provider where my ELA is written by another, and we're following kind of pacing guides for both of these, which don't really lend itself to adjusting, right? the way we did it, just let the teacher say, okay, let me grab these 6 concepts that I need to teach this year from science, because I could build them perfectly into this reading unit. So without having to follow that structure and pacing guide of those other subjects, it gave the teacher so much flexibility. And I remember it wasn't always like this, right? I remember when I first started teaching, they gave this giant binder and it was divided out by all the subjects. And they said, here, this is what you have to teach this year. It didn't say you have to teach this first 9 weeks and this second. It just said take them all. And I'm like, oh my goodness, all the things. What am I going to do, right? So I made a little column down the side of each one, and when I would hit that standard with my kids, I would check it. But I would just open it up and say, okay, I want to do this cool, like I'm going to build some technology in, and our kids are going to make commercials. And so, what could we do? How could we take some ELA concepts and some social studies concepts, and how can we make this a unit that the kids are going to build these cool commercials? And it gave me so much flexibility, and I had some of these amazing units that I got to do. And later, they called them the project-based learning. And I remember when that came out, and I was like, oh God, all the things. And my principal said, Nikki, that's what you do anyway. Like, we're basically saying this is how people should do it. I was like, oh, awesome, cool. But then pacing guides came and all these other things came that then made it really hard for me to just do what I knew I could do. So I feel for our teachers, I feel for our kids, and I feel like when we get so rigid on our concepts, then we miss out on some really good opportunities for learning.
I remember that. I totally had fun because when I first came into the public school system, I was teaching writing, and that was all I taught was when
Yes.
middle school had just a writing class. And I think it was in social studies. They were going to learn about Chicago. And so I started finding all this great material about the Great Fire, the Chicago Fire. And we read all these articles and kind of about the early PI system and the mafia and all this stuff about the
Yes.
Chicago Fire. And we got deep into it, reading about it and writing about it. And we had this incredible unit. So they're writing, but we're also doing social studies. And it's really fun and fascinating. And then I also did that with Native Americans and, kind of learning about a particular tribe and their whole history. And again, so it's natural that these things overlap. And as teachers are
Yes.
talking and working together, it makes it so much more enriching for the kids and exciting because it's like little pieces of the puzzle coming together. Okay, so now I want to talk about, I know a big concern that we hear all the time is about the mental health of our students, about the struggles that we're having with behaviors. And of course, this is impacting our teachers, our administrators, everybody. Where did you feel like you had some success with as being an administrator in terms of implementing any programs or initiatives that were helping with social emotional health of your students?
So early on, I'd say probably maybe second year into being a head principal, I met with Dr. David Didden at the West Virginia Health Department. And he talked to me about just our kids in general, right? Coming from trauma, coming from poverty, coming from a low socioeconomic status, and all the different things they were facing. And one of the things that I took away from what he said is he said, when you teach kids mindfulness and meditation, and you teach kids to just slow down and to self regulate, it is the greatest gift you could ever give them, because an emotionally unregulated child can't learn. And even if they can learn, they can't take that back out and apply that into their life in a meaningful way that could help put them on a different trajectory to self betterment and self empowerment. And I just thought about how incredible that was, right? Because I feel like with the right mindset, any kid can do anything, but we're not working on that. We're just working on the if you're given the opportunity, can you do the thing? And so we started talking about different programs that were in place and different things that we could do. We started focusing on a program called Zones of Regulations. And it kind of color codes things for kids. And like when I'm in the green zone, I'm happy and calm. When I'm in the yellow zone, I'm nervous or anxious. When I'm in the blue zone, I'm depressed or tired. When I'm in the red zone, I'm elevated or frustrated or angry. And but one of the most valuable things I think we did is, instead of just having a standalone guidance counselor that would be called in when there were some emergencies, we make guidance a part of our related arts. So kids would go to library and music and gym, and they would also go to guidance class. So every week they got that whole group guided lesson with our counselor, and she divided up how she would do things. But one of the big pushes was on emotional regulation. And so we started to put this emotional regulation piece in building wide. One of the most successful implementations was the kids would come in the morning and they would put their color where they were. So the teacher could look and kind of have a snapshot of her class for the day of here's how my kids are feeling for the day. Then I'd asked teachers to put a bookmark on their desk with the four zones. And as kids were moving throughout their day, they would move their little mark on their bookmark to how they were feeling. So it really taught the kids to just kind of check in with themselves and see, am I feeling anxious or nervous? Am I feeling calm? How am I feeling? So if I'm a teacher and I'm giving a class-wide test and I walk by and I have a kid who's yellow or blue, I know that's where I need to stop and to give my attention, that my other kids who are green are feeling pretty good about where they are. So it taught the kids to kind of look at themselves and understand their feelings. One of the big stresses with the program is just not to say, let's get you back to green, because not all kids live in that calm zone. And it reminded me of myself at yoga. I'm very uncomfortable because that calm, relaxed state is not my normal. I'm more of a yellow, I'm a hyper anxious person. It was really nice to teach kids that no matter where you are, it's okay. And then it went into these systems where we would teach kids, okay, when you're in the yellow zone, what makes you feel relaxed? What makes you feel calm? If you're angry, what tools do you have? So our kids started creating these toolboxes. And so where we would have liked to have gone with the program, where we were hoping to go in our next phase of that, we had looked at putting in a meditative session at the beginning and middle of our day. So our plan was that after the tardy bell rang, and once we were all in and settled, that we would close our building down and it would just be kind of that 5 minutes of meditation. Sign on the front door that says, our building prioritizes the mental health of our students. For the next 5 minutes, the doorbell will not be answered, calls will not be taken, the whole 9 yards. And then doing that again at the end of the day, because that post lunch and recess time is difficult for the little ones. And so we wanted to give them those few minutes to kind of come back in and get recentered and really just teach them that the way you feel should be a priority. It's not just what you do, it's how you feel and who you are. And so we were really hoping to do that, just kind of change that whole culture, that emotional culture in our building. I think that would have been a huge benefit for our kids and their learning.
Yeah, a lot of times it's the time factor. Can we find time for this? Can we find people, to help us with these programs and implement them well? So what do you think you might have needed in terms of time, in terms of people to make sure that this was done well?
And that's the big kicker, right? And ultimately, that is why when I tell you there's nothing on this planet I loved more than being a principal, it was my everything. I loved it. But ultimately, it got to the point where it wasn't a job, it was a lifestyle. And I had a late in life baby, and I had to really decide whether or not I had that much to give, because if I can't give 100%, I'm not the right person for the job anymore. And so ultimately, that's why I chose to leave. And it was because it was a full-time thing. With even the beginning stages that we put into that program took a whole team of people. And so
Mhm.
what we had done to implement it successfully, we looked at getting some stipends approved and changing the structure of our school's leadership team. And so we were going to change the structure of our committees and our leadership team. And the people who sat on the leadership team would be basically the chair of a committee, and they would be the people that we would pull in for those multiple day sessions or multiple hour sessions, and their pay would be assigned to this stipend. And then they would go back to their committees that was our school-based responsibility, where we had those, 30 minutes a month or whatever. And those would be kind of our boots on the ground people who would help that chairperson implement those things. But I mean, it just doing our pre-planning stages of that, I would say took 4 or 5 days of just locked in a room working over the summer. So that's the problem, is we have a lot of unfunded mandates as a public education system in West Virginia, primarily the way the legislature's set up. It is not conducive to understanding what we need or how to put that into play. So a lot of it was we had some constraints of all these things that we had to do that would have strictly been on a volunteer basis. So it was really just creating financial pathways to have people's time be appreciated to do these things. Otherwise, it's just finding somebody who can live there and will do all the things and do all the work. And ultimately, I will say, more so than any other profession on the planet, teachers are the ones that will do that, because they didn't get into the job for the money. They got into it for the love of what they do and for growing kids. And we had a lot of success with people just doing it, but it just wasn't fair.
I know you and I have had chats before about opening your own school and
Yes.
daydreaming about that and sort of what that would look like. So I wondered if you could just kind of sketch out what that would look like in your dreams. What would people walk into? What would they see? How would that pull in what you've been able to do within the public school system, but also what would be your own unique mark that might go beyond it?
When I got to our school, it was in a state of crisis. It was a version of, oh, what did I get myself into? But it was funny because when I decided I wanted to be a head principal, there were only 3 schools in our county that I said I ever had a desire to be a head principal of, and I ended up at one of those 3 schools. And it was just because I understand that culture and climate. I feel like I was a kid that came from that background, and that those were kind of my people. So the best compliment I got was a couple years after I had been there, and I thought we were really making some progress. The assistant superintendent walked in. He's like, I don't know how to describe it. It just feels good in here. It just feels so different. It feels lighter and safe and warm. And that's what it is, right? I feel like my ultimate goal is to just create a place that when you walk in, it's joy. And you know that you're in a place where great things are happening. And so I would take all of these pieces of the little things I tried to do and just go all in, because who's going to tell me I can't, right? If you don't like it, you just don't bring your kid there, and that's okay. And other than that, we just do what we know is good for kids that are in this building. And so I would definitely start off, I would build in those meditation moments throughout the day. I love listening to Oprah about her organization where they shut down and they do meditation, and how it's changed so many things for those organizations. So really huge focus on whole child, huge focus on a child's social emotional health and learning, definitely with checks in for regulation, with teaching kids self-regulations, teaching kids about their nervous system and how they can calm the vagus nerve and do all these things to make themselves feel like they're ready for life and ready for learning. Complete individualized on our learning model, really kind of assessing our kids and having flexible groupings with what kid needs to be in what group at what level for each skill, not necessarily just I'm on a 4th grade level or 5th grade level, but when we're doing reading, I'm with this group, and when we're doing math, I'm with this group. And those groups are really structured to meeting kids where they're at and growing them to where they need to be. So really a total flexible learning model. I would go multi-generational throughout the whole building, not specific grade levels, K through 5. Um, yeah, I'm sure it would be very interesting for some people. And I know it sounds silly, but I really like just the idea of kind of family style meals in school systems. I don't like we come in and when my class has to sit here or sit there, but really kind of building that community, total hands-on and collaborative learning, huge conversations.
So your dream is essentially an elementary school. That's what you dream of.
Yeah, I think that's where I would start, because it was really funny when I started off at the high school, and then I went to middle, and then I went to elementary. And at the high school, the teachers would say, oh, there's just middle school teachers. If they would just do their job, our job wouldn't be so hard. And then I went to middle school, and they said, if those elementary school teachers would just teach them the foundation, it wouldn't be so hard. And I got to elementary, and the only thing they could say was the parents, right? So one of my first conversations with them was, here's what everyone says, guys, right? In elementary, we have the beauty of the only thing we could say is if those darn parents would just do their jobs. So I'll make it easy for you. We're going to be the parents, right? Loco parentis. We're going to take that concept and we're going to wrap it all around this building. And when they walk in that door that morning, they are your babies. You raise them the way you think they need to be raised within the confines of school, right? We're going to teach them school behavior. We're going to teach them school rules. We're going to teach them manners and respect. And we're going to teach them the foundation. Because when we do that, we will have done it so well that nobody can say anything else. When they go to middle school, they've got these perfect little children. And unless the middle school messes them up, so will the high school. And they kind of laughed at me, but again, like, I just think that that's where we have the most bang for our buck. So I feel like that's the time where we can build their confidence and we can build their self-esteem. And we had one of our kids that really struggled. I mean, special education pull out self-contained services for reading and math and some behavior issues and everything. And our superintendent came in and she was doing a walkthrough, and she said, wow, that math looks really hard. Like, how do you feel about that? And he said, it's fine. I'm a math genius. And I'm like, if we have our kids that are, by textbook definition, the ones that are struggling, but the confidence level that they're a math genius, they can do anything. That's a kid that we can teach anything to, that we can bridge those gaps, that we can have ready to go out and take on whatever they decide to do. But I think often, subconsciously, I think we kill that at that age. And once you do that, it never comes back. So I've never thought I would be an elementary school person until I got there. And now that's definitely where I'd want to live. Yeah. So I definitely want to start with elementary school.
That's so funny. I'm the same way. I'm completely
Yeah.
converted from starting at college all the way down to elementary. I'm completely converted to elementary school. I'm now.
So not all your listeners probably know your progression and things, but when I got to the elementary school, I had worked with all of these incredible educators, and one of them was Ms. Ryan. And I thought, man, if there's anybody who could find a problem and go out and research and just be innovative and passionate and look at this whole child and figure out all the things they needed to do for this child and their specific niche, it would be Ms. Rod. And so we had a special ed opening over COVID. And I called and said, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I
I
think you would
know.
be the perfect elementary special educator. And I will say, hands down, out of everyone I've ever worked with, you are the best special educator I've ever worked with. You are
Oh,
phenomenal. So if we could clone you, yes, all day.
I know. I know. We were a dynamic duo. It was great.
Yeah. And we got a small start being a dynamic administrative duo before our time was over. But
I
yeah.
know.
So in case you're wondering, in my perfect school, you will be a part of that. It's not
No.
something I would want to do with anyone else.
That would be awesome. That would be amazing. If only we could do it within the public school system. So then we
Yes,
could
and
offer it to, those everyday children who deserve
there you
that
go.
kind of schooling.
And so I guess what I would say if I had one wish, is that maybe our public school system would look at something like that, right? Would look at just a total pilot out of the box system that I feel like to be a good case study would need at least a few years to run that system. And maybe parents get to, sign up voluntarily for whether or not their students go. But it would be amazing if there would be a way that we could just kind of do something as a pilot, right? Present an outline of here's what the plan looks like, here's what the curriculum's going to look like, here are all the things that we're going to do, and have a few years to see if that model works. And maybe ultimately, even if we take pieces of the model and implement it, there could be something that could have some systematic change, because that is always the danger when we look at charter schools, we look at private schools, we look at all of these different things, is that not everyone has equal access, right? And unless it has some funding, it's definitely not going to be for every student. So ideally, if we could have a state legislature or even a county that would really fight for the chance or the opportunity to try something like that, I think the change we could make would be revolutionary.
I totally agree. And I think that's the dream we have to push, I think, and that we have to say a dream can be a reality if we really want it. And
Yes.
we have to present it as something that is feasible because we've seen pieces of it. We've seen pieces of it in your school. We've seen pieces of it in other schools. So it's not that the pieces aren't there. They're there. They've been implemented. It's just a matter of seeing it in a bigger picture model that I think would be really a phenomenal thing to offer to our community. It could be a model that a lot of families would be really excited about.
And we've got a lot of families whose kid just doesn't meet that mold of I'm going to come in, I'm going to sit at my desk, I'm going to be quiet, I'm going to raise my hand. Who, when they've been able to do it a little differently, have made so much progress. I was that kid. I couldn't sit down and be quiet. Like that wasn't my jam. They'd put my desk out in the hallway, which I know is a huge no now, but they would move my little desk down to the hallway and I'd sit out there and somebody sit out there and be quiet. And I would get all my work done for the whole week in one afternoon because I was semi-focused because I was all alone with no distraction. And they put me on ADHD meds and I'd stick it down the hole in the water fountain and then just try to be really quiet for the day. But when I got to fourth grade, listen, the fact that I ended up in education shocks anyone that went through the public school system with me. I see some of
Mhm.
them as parents and I'm like, listen, I promise I'm much better educator than I was a student. Like I promise your child's okay with me. Bring them in here. I know everything not to do. Um, but yeah, it's sad that for some of the kids, for me, that made me a little more determined, right? I just want to show them that I could do everything they said I can't do. But for some of our kids, that early exposure to that is just enough to break their spirit. And so shame on us. We can do better. There are other countries around the world that are doing better. There are other states around the country that are doing better. We can do better. And even if we start with one or two small things, then that's what we owe our kids. Every kid has something that you love. Every kid has something that they're gifted at. And if we find that and we make that connection, our kids will work because they want to make us happy. They want to be their best version of themselves for us. And I feel like we get so tired and overwhelmed and grouchy and we're trying to check these boxes that we've lost that a little bit as a public school. Well, we lost that a lot as a public school system. And I feel like when you could just make that small change, when you could just make a kid feel great at something, the policies, the initiatives, all those things don't matter because the kids are going to come and they're going to do their best, and you're going to come and you're going to do what's best for kids. But we really have to get back to being a system where that's what we do. And sadly, it's just not where we are right now.
Ultimately, like, it should be fun. It should be joyful. I
Yes.
mean, learning is
Yes.
fun. Learning can be incredibly joyful and exciting. And, I mean, when we have those moments, that reminds us of what this is all about. And it really is that, I mean, it is exploratory and curious and fun. And I certainly, have had that with my students. But as you get more and more things stacked in front of you that you have to complete, it just suffocates that more and more and more. And that's a shame because in the end, it could be a pretty fantastic profession if you're really allowed to be in those joyful moments with your students.
Exactly. Exactly.
Thank you, Nikki Johnson, so much for coming today on to Can I Get a Whiteboard? I enjoyed talking to you so much. Final thoughts you'd like to share with our audience?
I think the number one thing I've heard coming into education is that it takes a village, right? And there are teachers and principals and people who are boots on the ground and who are doing these things every day, but they don't have the power to make change as an isolated group. So if public school isn't working for your child, if it isn't working for you, if you came through the public school system and you realized there were so many things that could have done better that would have made your experience as a student better or made your entry into the real world a better place, then it's your job to reach out and advocate for those changes the same as it is for your child's teacher and your child's principal. So I'd really say to ask everyone to just use their voice to make it known what they need and what their kids need, and to really just be an advocate for positive change, because there are no reason that any of the things we talked about today couldn't be happening on a daily basis, and we will turn out better students and better happier members of society if we catch them now. And I feel like public school is the easiest place that we could start instituting changes that will affect our kids for a lifetime.